He thought she was just another traveler in need of help until he saw what was inside the sack. From that moment, both their lives were on the line. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The dust settled on the dirt road as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Texas plains. Thomas Calloway wiped the sweat from his brow with a weathered handkerchief as he guided his horse-drawn wagon toward his ranch. The year was 1885, and life in Willow Creek had been particularly challenging since the drought began. Thomas, a widower of 3 years, had managed to keep his ranch afloat despite the hardships, but each day brought new struggles. His tired eyes scanned the horizon, a habit formed from years of vigilance in these untamed lands. Something caught his attention, a small figure slumped by the side of the road. As he drew closer, he realized it was a woman, barely conscious, clutching a burlap sack to her chest. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Thomas called out, pulling his horses to a stop. The woman, her face streaked with dirt and dried tears, looked up at him with desperate eyes. Her clothes were torn and dusty, suggesting she'd been traveling for days. She couldn't have been more than 30 years old, but hardship had carved premature lines into her face. "Water," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please." Thomas quickly reached for his canteen and jumped down from the wagon. He knelt beside her, gently offering the water. She drank greedily, some of it spilling down her chin. "Thank you," she managed, clutching the sack even tighter as she attempted to stand. "What's your name, ma'am? What are you doing out here all alone?" Thomas asked, supporting her elbow. Sarah Mitchell," she replied, her voice stronger now. "I've been running." "Running from what?" Sarah's eyes darted nervously around, scanning the empty road behind them. "My husband ex-husband. He's a violent man. I had to get away." Thomas nodded grimly. Such stories weren't uncommon in these parts. "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere he can't find me," she said, clutching the sack protectively against her chest. Thomas noticed how she never loosened her grip on it, not even when she was nearly fainting from thirst. "My ranch is just a couple miles down this road. You're welcome to rest there until you figure out your next steps," Thomas offered, helping her onto the wagon. Sarah hesitated, her eyes still wary. "Why would you help a stranger?" Thomas adjusted his worn cowboy hat and sighed. "My late wife would never forgive me if I left someone in need on the side of the road. Besides, we look out for each other in these parts. It's how we survive." As they rode toward the ranch, Thomas couldn't help but notice how Sarah kept glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear on the horizon at any moment. The burlap sack remained firmly in her grasp, and whenever the wagon hit a bump, she would check it anxiously. "Must be something mighty important in that sack," Thomas observed casually. Sarah's grip tightened further. "It's all I have left," she said softly. When they arrived at the ranch, Thomas's foreman, Jim Peterson, came out to greet them. His weathered face registered surprise at the sight of Sarah. "Jim, this is Sarah Mitchell. She'll be staying with us for a spell. Would you mind taking care of the horses while I show her to the guest room?" Jim nodded, his curious eyes lingering on the mysterious woman and her sack. "Of course, boss. Supper will be ready in about an hour." Thomas led Sarah into the modest ranch house. It was simple but comfortable, with handcrafted furniture and faded photographs of his late wife, Eleanor. Sarah's eyes took in every detail, as if assessing whether this place could truly be safe. "The guest room is down this hall," Thomas explained. "There's a wash basin with fresh water, and I'll ask Maria, our cook, to bring you some clean clothes. Eleanor's things. They might fit you." Sarah paused at the doorway of the guest room. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. Your kindness is unexpected." "Thomas, call me Thomas," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome to stay as long as you need." As Thomas turned to leave, Sarah suddenly grabbed his arm. Her eyes were filled with an intensity that startled him. "Please," she whispered, "if anyone comes looking for me, anyone tell them you've never seen me." Thomas nodded slowly. "You have my word." Later that evening, after a simple but hearty meal, Thomas sat on the porch, smoking his pipe and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Sarah joined him, looking somewhat refreshed after washing up and changing into Eleanor's old dress, though her face still carried the haunted look of someone perpetually looking over her shoulder. The mysterious sack was still with her, never out of arm's reach. "Beautiful land you have here," she commented, sitting in the rocking chair beside him. "Been in my family for 3 generations," Thomas replied. "Not always easy, but it's home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the creaking of the rocking chairs and the distant lowing of cattle. "He'll come looking for me," Sarah finally said, her voice barely audible. "Daniel isn't the type to let go easily, especially not of what's in this sack." Thomas puffed thoughtfully on his pipe. "What exactly is in there that's worth chasing you across the country for?" Sarah's knuckles whitened around the burlap. I can't tell you yet. But please believe me when I say he can never get his hands on it." Thomas studied her face in the fading light. Whatever secret she carried clearly weighed heavily on her. "Well, you're safe here for now. Try to get some rest." As Sarah stood to go inside, the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats caused her to freeze, her face drained of color. "Is that normal? Visitors at this hour?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. Thomas frowned, setting down his pipe. "No, it ain't normal at all." Thomas rose from his chair, his weathered hand instinctively moving to the rifle leaning against the porch railing. The hoofbeats grew louder, dust rising in the distance as the last rays of sunlight faded from the Texas sky. "Get inside," Thomas instructed Sarah, his voice low but firm. "Go to the back bedroom and lock the door." Sarah clutched the burlap sack to her chest, her knuckles white with tension. "Is it him? Is it Daniel? I don't know, but I aim to find out." "Now go on," Thomas urged. Sarah disappeared into the house just as Jim emerged from the bunkhouse, shotgun in hand. He exchanged a knowing glance with Thomas before taking position near the barn. The rider came into view, a single man on horseback, not the posse Sarah seemed to fear. Thomas relaxed slightly but kept his rifle ready. The stranger pulled his exhausted horse to a stop in front of the ranch house. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a badge pinned to his vest. "Evening," the man called out, tipping his hat. "Name's Marshal Robert Hayes from Fort Worth. I'm looking for a woman who might have passed through these parts." Thomas's expression remained neutral. "Don't get many travelers out this way, Marshal. What's your business with this woman?" Hayes dismounted, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he approached the porch. "She's wanted for theft. Took something of considerable value from her husband before fleeing." "Theft, you say?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Must be something mighty valuable to send a marshal all this way." Hayes nodded, his eyes scanning the property. "Family heirlooms. Gold pieces passed down for generations. Her husband is quite desperate to recover them." Thomas noted how the marshal avoided meeting his gaze directly. "Something didn't sit right." "Your badge," Thomas said slowly. "Fort Worth, you said." "That's right." The marshal shifted his weight. "Funny thing," Thomas continued. "My brother-in-law's the sheriff in Fort Worth. Just visited him last month. Don't recall him mentioning a Marshal Hayes." A tense silence fell between them. The marshal's hand inched toward his holster. "I suggest you turn around and leave my property," Thomas said evenly, raising his rifle slightly. "Whatever game you're playing, I want no part of it." The man's face hardened. "My name isn't Hayes, but the woman is still a thief. Her name is Sarah Mitchell, and she stole from Daniel Mitchell, a powerful man who doesn't take kindly to being robbed." "Never heard of either of them," Thomas replied. "Now, I won't ask again. Leave my property." The man's eyes narrowed. "I've ridden a long way, Calloway. I know she's here. Daniel Mitchell doesn't give up what's his." Jim stepped forward from the shadows, his shotgun aimed squarely at the imposter. "The boss asked you to leave." After a tense moment, the man slowly backed toward his horse. "This isn't over. Mitchell has friends all over the territory. You've made a powerful enemy today. Wouldn't be the first time," Thomas replied coldly. They watched as the man mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did Thomas lower his rifle. "Keep an eye out tonight, Jim," he instructed. "I don't trust that he's gone for good." Jim nodded grimly. "I'll have the boys take shifts." Inside the house, Thomas found Sarah huddled in the corner of the bedroom, the burlap sack clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Was it him?" she whispered. "Not your husband, but someone working for him," Thomas replied, setting his rifle aside. "He's gone for now, but I reckon he'll be back with others." Sarah's shoulders slumped. "I've brought trouble to your door. I should leave before anyone gets hurt." Thomas shook his head firmly. "That's exactly what they want, to catch you alone on the open road. You're safer here, at least for now." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "You don't understand what Daniel is capable of. He's not just some angry husband. He's dangerous, connected. The things he's done... Double quotes, her voice broke. Thomas pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Sarah, I can't help you if I don't know what we're up against. What exactly did you take from him?" Sarah's hands trembled as she looked down at the burlap sack. After a long moment of internal struggle, she whispered, "Please... take them off." She loosened the string around the sack and held it out to Thomas. With hesitant hands, Thomas took the sack and opened it. His eyes widened in shock at what lay inside. Not gold or jewelry as the false marshal had claimed, but documents, land deeds, contracts, and a leather-bound ledger. "These are... Thomas began, leafing through the papers. "Evidence," Sarah finished for him. "Evidence of everything illegal Daniel has done. The people he's cheated, the land he's stolen, the men he's had killed. He's been building an empire through fear and corruption." Thomas examined the land deed closely. "This is the Wilson property. Old man Wilson supposedly lost it in a card game last year, but rumors said the game was rigged." Sarah nodded. "It was. Just like the dozen other properties Daniel has taken. The ledger contains names, dates, amounts paid to officials, and hired guns. It's all there. Why did you take these?" Thomas asked, carefully returning the documents to the sack. Sarah's eyes hardened with determination. "Because I watched him destroy too many lives. Because he beat me nearly to death when I threatened to leave him. Because someone has to stop him before he controls the entire territory." Thomas leaned back, processing this new information. "You're planning to take these to the authorities?" "To a judge in Austin," Sarah confirmed. "A man Daniel hasn't bought yet. With these documents, Daniel could go to prison for the rest of his life." "That explains why he sent someone after you so quickly," Thomas mused, "and why he'll keep coming." "Now you understand why I need to leave," Sarah insisted. "I've already stayed too long." Thomas shook his head. "You'd never make it to Austin alone. Every road will be watched." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah's voice held a note of desperation. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, weighing their options. "I know these lands better than any of Daniel's men ever could. I can get you to Austin, but we'll need to be smart about it. Take routes they wouldn't expect." "You'd do that? Risk your life, your ranch?" Thomas looked at the photograph of Eleanor on the bedside table. "My wife believed in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. I reckon I still do too." Later that night, as the ranch settled into an uneasy quiet, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with Jim and his most trusted ranch hand, a young man named Charlie. "We'll leave at first light," Thomas explained, tracing a route on an old map spread before them. "The main roads will be watched, so we'll cut through Hawks Canyon and follow the dry creek bed south. It's a 3-day ride to Austin that way," Jim pointed out. "Better 3 days alive than 1 day dead," Thomas replied grimly. "Jim, you'll stay here with most of the men. Make it look like business as usual. Charlie, you'll ride ahead as a scout." Charlie nodded eagerly. At 22, he was the youngest of the ranch hands, but had proven himself capable and loyal. "What if more of Mitchell's men show up here?" Jim asked. "Tell them I took Sarah to Fort Worth to sort this mess out. Should buy us enough time to reach Austin." As they finalized their plans, Thomas couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. He was about to risk everything for a woman he barely knew, against a man powerful enough to send false lawmen to his door. Yet something in Sarah's eyes when she spoke of Daniel's crimes told him she was telling the truth. Some injustices couldn't be ignored, no matter the personal cost. Outside, the Texas night was alive with the sound of cicadas and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Somewhere beyond the darkness, Thomas knew Daniel Mitchell was gathering his forces. By this time tomorrow, they would be in a race against ruthless men, a race where losing meant far worse than death. Dawn broke over the ranch with streaks of pink and gold painting the sky. Thomas had barely slept, his mind churning with plans and contingencies. He found Sarah already awake, dressed in riding clothes borrowed from Eleanor's closet, her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "You look ready," Thomas observed, handing her a cup of strong coffee. Sarah nodded, the burlap sack now secured inside a leather saddlebag. "I've been ready to run for longer than you know." Thomas studied her face in the early morning light. Despite her fear, there was a quiet determination in her eyes that reminded him of Eleanor. His wife had possessed the same unwavering resolve when faced with adversity. "We'll take the South Trail through Hawks Canyon," Thomas explained. "It's rough country, but Mitchell's men likely won't think to look there. Charlie's already ridden ahead to scout. Maria, the cook, prepared provisions for their journey: jerky, hardtack, and dried fruit wrapped in oilcloth. Jim helped saddle 3 horses, including a sturdy Palomino for Sarah. "Remember," Thomas instructed Jim, "if anyone comes asking, you tell them I've taken her to Fort Worth to straighten things out with the law." Jim nodded solemnly. "Be careful out there, boss. Men like Mitchell don't play by any rules." As they mounted their horses, the rising sun casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Thomas felt a pang of uncertainty. His ranch had been his entire world since Eleanor's passing. Now he was leaving it vulnerable, possibly for nothing. Sarah seemed to sense his hesitation. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "I could still try to make it on my own." Thomas shook his head. "My father always said a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's watching. I reckon helping you is the right thing to do, even if it comes at a cost." They rode out as the ranch hands began their daily chores, maintaining the appearance of an ordinary day. Thomas led them south, away from the main roads, across open grassland that gradually gave way to rockier terrain. By mid-morning, they reached the entrance to Hawks Canyon, a narrow passage between towering limestone walls. "Not many know about this route," Thomas explained as they navigated the narrow trail. "Used to be an old Apache path before the territory was settled." Sarah marveled at the ancient petroglyphs etched into the canyon walls. "It's beautiful, in a rugged way." "That's Texas for you," Thomas replied with a small smile. "Beautiful and dangerous in equal measure." They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds being the clip-clop of hooves on stone and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. The canyon twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing so much they had to ride single file. Around midday, they emerged from the canyon into a small sheltered valley with a spring-fed pool. Charlie was waiting for them, his young face serious. "All clear so far, Mr. Calloway," he reported. "No sign of anyone following." "Good work, Charlie," Thomas said, dismounting to let the horses drink. "What's ahead?" "Open country for about 10 miles. Then we hit the dry creek bed that'll take us south toward Austin. I scouted about 5 miles down. It looks clear." They rested briefly, eating some of Maria's provisions while the horses grazed on the sparse grass near the spring. Sarah sat slightly apart from the men, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "You've been looking over your shoulder a long time, haven't you?" Thomas asked, sitting beside her. Sarah nodded. 3 years married to Daniel taught me to always be alert. He has a temper that comes without warning." "How did you end up with a man like that?" Sarah's eyes grew distant. "He was charming at first. My father had just died, leaving substantial debts. Daniel stepped in, paid everything off, presented himself as my savior." Her laugh was bitter. "By the time I saw his true nature, I was already trapped. And the documents? Thomas asked quietly. I discovered them by accident. Daniel kept them in a hidden safe in his study. One night, after he'd had too much whiskey, he left it unlocked. Sarah's hands trembled slightly at the memory. I knew then that I had to get away, had to do something with what I'd found. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Takes courage to stand up to someone powerful. Or desperation, Sarah replied softly. Charlie approached them, interrupting the conversation. Mr. Calloway, we should move on. There's still plenty of daylight left. They continued their journey, leaving the valley and crossing open range before finding the dry creek bed Charlie had mentioned. The ancient watercourse wound its way through the landscape like a giant serpent, providing natural cover as they traveled. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. There's an old line shack about 3 miles ahead, Thomas said, eyeing the clouds with concern. We can shelter there for the night. They pushed their horses harder, eager to reach shelter before the storm broke. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and stirring dust devils across the parched earth. The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin with a small corral for horses, built years ago as a waypoint for cowboys working the far reaches of various ranches. It was weathered but solid, offering protection from the elements. They had just unsaddled the horses when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, the sky opened up, turning the dusty ground to mud and filling the air with the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil. Inside the shack, Thomas lit a lantern while Charlie got a small fire going in the stone fireplace. Sarah placed her saddlebag carefully on a rickety table, never letting it far from her sight. Storm might slow down anyone following us, Charlie observed optimistically. Or wash away our tracks, Thomas added. Either way, it works in our favor. They prepared a simple meal of beef jerky and hardtack, supplemented with canned beans, Charlie found on a shelf left behind by previous occupants. As they ate, lightning flashed outside, followed by booming thunder that shook the small cabin. Reminds me of the night I left, Sarah said quietly, staring into the fire. There was a storm then too. I took it as a sign nature covering my escape. Thomas was about to respond when Charlie, who had been looking out the window, suddenly tensed. Mr. Calloway, he whispered urgently. There's riders approaching. At least 3 of them. Thomas immediately extinguished the lantern while Sarah gathered her saddlebag. They peered through the rain-streaked window at the approaching figures, barely visible through the downpour. How did they find us? Sarah whispered, fear evident in her voice. They might not be looking for us, Thomas replied, though he didn't sound convinced. This is the only shelter for miles around in this storm. What do we do? Charlie asked, his young face tense in the firelight. Thomas considered their options. The cabin had only 1 door and 2 small windows. There was nowhere to hide, and running into the storm would leave them exposed and vulnerable. We stand our ground, he decided, checking his revolver. Charlie, take position by the window. Sarah, stay low behind the table. The riders drew closer, their forms becoming more distinct through the rain. Thomas could make out 3 men, all armed, approaching cautiously. Calloway, a voice called out over the storm. We know you're in there. Send out the woman and the documents, and we'll let you live. Thomas's jaw tightened. How did they know to look for us here? Daniel has informants everywhere, Sarah said bitterly. Someone at your ranch must have talked. Or they tortured the information out of someone, Charlie added grimly. Thomas moved to the door, keeping to the side to avoid being an easy target. You're trespassing on private property, he shouted back. I suggest you move on. Don't be a fool, Calloway. The voice replied. Mitchell just wants what's his. The woman's filled your head with lies. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene outside. Thomas recognized the speaker as the false marshal from the previous day, now accompanied by 2 rough-looking men. We're not leaving without her. The man continued. If we have to burn you out, we will. Thomas exchanged a grim look with Charlie. They were outnumbered, with limited ammunition and nowhere to retreat. Any ideas? Charlie whispered. Thomas's mind raced. The storm was their only advantage: poor visibility, difficult shooting conditions. If they could somehow use that. I have an idea, Sarah said suddenly, her voice steady despite her fear. But you'll have to trust me. Thomas turned to Sarah, noting the determined set of her jaw despite the fear in her eyes. What are you thinking? They want me in the documents, she said, her voice low but steady. We can use that. I'll go out there, create a distraction. While their attention is on me, you two can flank them from the sides. Thomas shook his head firmly. Too dangerous. They'll grab you the moment you step outside. Sarah's eyes flashed with resolve. Not if I make them believe I've hidden the documents somewhere else. Daniel wants those papers more than he wants me. Outside, the false marshal grew impatient. You've got 1 minute, Calloway, then we start shooting. The rain continued to pound against the cabin, thunder rolling across the sky. Thomas weighed their limited options, his mind working furiously. Charlie, he said finally, there's a back window in the lean-to. It's small, but you could squeeze through it. Circle around while I keep them talking. Get behind them if you can. Charlie nodded, immediately moving toward the rear of the cabin. Thomas turned back to Sarah. I need you to stay hidden. No matter what happens, don't come out until it's safe. But Sarah began to protest. No arguments, Thomas cut her off. You're what matters here. Those documents are the only chance to stop Mitchell for good. Before Sarah could respond, a warning shot struck the cabin wall, sending splinters flying. Time's up, Calloway, the false marshal shouted. Thomas moved to the window, keeping to the side. Hold your fire. I'm coming out to talk. Thomas, don't, Sarah pleaded, clutching his arm. He gently removed her hand. Trust me, I've been in worse spots than this. Grabbing his hat, Thomas opened the door just enough to slip through, then stepped onto the small porch with his hands raised. The rain immediately soaked him, running in rivulets down his weathered face. The 3 men had spread out, their horses tethered to a nearby tree. The false marshal stood in the center, his gun trained on Thomas. Where's the woman? He demanded. Gone, Thomas replied calmly. Took off hours ago with the documents. Headed for Austin by a different route. The man's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You're lying. Her horse is still here. She took my horse, Thomas countered smoothly. Faster than hers. Said something about having friends waiting in Willow Creek to escort her the rest of the way. The false marshal exchanged uncertain glances with his companions. Search the cabin, he ordered one of the men. As the hired gun moved toward the cabin, Thomas tensed. If they found Sarah, all would be lost. But just as the man reached the porch steps, a gunshot rang out from the darkness, causing him to stumble backward with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. Charlie had made his move. In the ensuing confusion, Thomas dove for cover behind a water barrel as bullets splintered the wood around him. He drew his revolver and returned fire, aiming at the false marshal who was now scrambling for shelter behind a large rock. The night erupted into chaos, muzzle flashes illuminating the rain-soaked darkness, the crack of gunshots competing with the thunder overhead. Thomas caught glimpses of Charlie moving from tree to tree, using the storm as cover. Inside the cabin, Sarah watched the gunfight through a crack in the shutters, her heart pounding. When she saw one of Mitchell's men circling toward the back of the cabin, toward Charlie's position, she made a split-second decision. Grabbing a cast-iron pan from the hearth, she slipped out the door and circled wide around the cabin. The rain and darkness concealed her movements as she approached the man from behind. With all her strength, she brought the pan down on his head. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. The false marshal, seeing his advantage disappearing, made a desperate move. Breaking cover, he charged toward the cabin, firing wildly. One bullet grazed Thomas's arm, causing him to drop his gun. It's over, Calloway, the man shouted, approaching with his revolver aimed at Thomas's chest. Thomas, clutching his bleeding arm, stared defiantly at the false marshal. You'll never get those documents. Then I'll just have to kill you and find them myself, the man snarled, cocking his weapon. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from the marshal's gun. The man's eyes widened in surprise as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. He turned slowly to see Sarah standing a few yards away, Thomas's fallen revolver smoking in her hands. The false marshal collapsed to his knees, then fell face forward into the mud. Sarah lowered the gun, her hands shaking but her eyes steady. "I told you Daniel's men don't play by any rules," she said quietly. Thomas rose shakily to his feet. "Are you all right?" Sarah nodded, the rain washing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "I've never killed anyone before." "You did what you had to do," Thomas assured her, gently taking the gun from her trembling hands. Charlie emerged from the darkness, soaked but unharmed. "The third one's running away on foot," he reported. "His horse spooked during the shooting." "He won't get far in this storm," Thomas said grimly. "But we should move on at first light, just to be safe." They returned to the cabin, where Thomas bandaged his arm with Sarah's help. The wound was painful but not serious. The bullet had only grazed him. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, leaving behind a gentle rainfall that washed away the blood and evidence of their desperate fight. As dawn approached, they prepared to continue their journey. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a world washed clean, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. "We've got about 2 days' ride to Austin," Thomas said as they saddled the horses. "Mitchell will have more men looking for us, but at least these 3 won't be reporting back." Sarah secured the precious saddlebag, her movements more confident than before. "I've been running scared for so long," she said thoughtfully. "Last night was the first time I stood my ground." "Courage isn't about not being afraid," Thomas replied. "It's about doing what's right despite the fear." The journey to Austin proved less eventful than their first day on the trail. They took back roads and game trails, avoiding settlements and staying alert for any sign of pursuit. Charlie rode ahead as a scout, returning periodically to report all clear. On the afternoon of the second day, they crested a hill and saw Austin in the distance, its buildings glinting in the sunlight. "We made it," Sarah breathed, relief evident in her voice. Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The hard part's still ahead. Finding a judge who isn't in Mitchell's pocket won't be easy." "I have a name," Sarah said. "Judge William Harrington. He sentenced one of Daniel's associates to prison last year despite threats and bribes. If anyone will listen, it's him." They rode into Austin as the sun began to set, the streets busy with people heading home after a day's work. Thomas secured rooms at a small hotel on the outskirts of town, away from the main thoroughfares where they might be recognized. The next morning, they made their way to the courthouse, the saddlebag containing the incriminating documents, clutched tightly in Sarah's arms. The building was imposing columns of white stone rising 3 stories high, a symbol of law and order in the often lawless territory. Judge Harrington proved to be a stern-faced man with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for incorruptibility. He listened in silence as Sarah presented her story and the evidence she'd risked her life to deliver. "These accusations are serious, Mrs. Mitchell," the judge said finally, examining the ledger with methodical care. "Your husband has powerful friends." "I'm aware, Your Honor," Sarah replied steadily. "But the truth in those documents is more powerful." Judge Harrington nodded slowly. "I'll need time to review everything and confer with federal authorities. This goes beyond my jurisdiction alone." "Will you protect her?" Thomas asked bluntly. "Mitchell won't stop coming after her just because she's reached Austin." The judge considered this. "I'll arrange for U.S. Marshals real ones to provide protection until this matter is resolved. Mrs. Mitchell will be a key witness when the time comes." As they left the courthouse, a weight seemed to lift from Sarah's shoulders. For the first time since Thomas had found her by the roadside, her smile reached her eyes. "It's really over," she said wonderingly. "After all this time, Daniel will finally face justice." Thomas wasn't so certain. "It may take time. Men like Mitchell don't go down easily." "But they do go down," Sarah insisted. "And now, thanks to you, I'll be there to see it happen." They stood on the courthouse steps. The bustling city of Austin spread before them, filled with possibilities neither had imagined just days before. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked. Sarah considered the question. "Testify when the time comes. After that... I don't know. Start over somewhere new, I suppose." Thomas hesitated, then took her hand. "My ranch could use a good manager. Someone with courage and determination." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with understanding. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Calloway?" "For starters," Thomas replied with a small smile. "The rest, well, that's a trail we could explore together, if you're willing." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears, not of fear this time, but of hope. "I think I'd like that very much." As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Thomas realized that in helping Sarah find her courage, he had rediscovered his own. The ranch that had once been merely his refuge from grief now promised to be something more, a place of new beginnings, built on the foundation of doing what was right, no matter the cost. And for the first time in 3 years, Thomas Calloway looked to the future with something more than resignation. He looked to it with hope.